Welcome, everyone, into Redacted on this Wednesday evening. I'm Clayton Morris.
I'm Natalie Morris.
And on this show, our goal is to seek the truth wherever it leads us, covering the stories the mainstream media largely ignores. And I don't know that the Western media is going to be covering, I think, almost every story we have in tonight's show. Maybe one of them for the most part. We're going to look at what's going on in Ukraine and Vladimir Putin giving a big speech today, earlier this morning, and he went through bullet point by bullet point of what he plans to do in Ukraine, what he plans to do to the West, how the West has failed. We're going to sort of dissect this entire speech today.
Yes, we are. And in fact, the conference that he's speaking at the Eastern Economic Forum, you have to search around pretty hard to find any information about it in the West. But it is just as, arguably just as big as any of the Western summits, the G20 and that kind of thing. So we are going to talk about it because it's equally big news for East meets West. We are also going to talk about who exactly is shelling the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant because we have a report. We're going to leave that there as a cliffhanger.
Yeah, the report's super detailed. I mean, we really know a lot of new information this afternoon in this nuclear report, so we're going to go through that. We're also going to have a special guest here on the show to talk about Israel attacking Syria, the very latest there that, again, Western media has totally ignored this story, so we will cover that. We're also going to look at Serbia, too.
Yes, we are going to look at Serbia because the West has taken the opportunity to lecture them about how to behave and create peace, because that seems to be working out so well for those of us.
So you can subscribe right here. When you subscribe, your name will pop right up here on, how would you say that? Tanginin Helipo just subscribed. Your screen name.
Probably that's not right.
Commandant 55 will pop up here on the screen.
Or K. Madden.
K. Madden. If you subscribe, your name will pop up there, and do it throughout the show because Redacted starts right now.
All right, so we're just moments off. What is that?
What? No, what were you going to say?
Go ahead.
No, what?
We're just moments off the new Apple event, everybody. This is something that had Clayton actually sits down and eats a meal. This is a fall ritual in our house. And I'm going to tell you that I like none of the watches better than the band I've got. So I'm sticking with a rainbow. Just want to let you know that. All right. What were you going to point out to me?
Yeah.
I can and I will. Go ahead.
I was going to say in the chat. Go ahead. Yeah. No, it's already done. It's wrapped up. It's wrapped up. Yeah. So we've got a big show lined up for you today on the show. We're going to talk about what's going on in the West in response to Vladimir Putin. And by the way, before we start, I wanted to show you this. I don't know if you saw this today. This was just tweeted just a few moments ago. They are now giving hot water tours in Russia. So this is what it's come to in Europe. The European division of Russia's oldest tour operator, Intourist, started offering winter tour packages to Russia for EU citizens. Packages include unlimited hot showers, daily visits to the Sandunavskaya Banya, and a heated room with electricity. So you'll get electricity.
That's modern living, folks.
That's modern living.
I mean, this is just off the news that the EU will now propose mandatory targets for reducing electricity at peak hours. For people, of course, not for businesses. No businesses will be asked for any sacrifices, but for the rest of us, yes.
But also at the same time, of course, then the EU is also just approved a massive new package of sanctions, or excuse me, a massive new tranche of billions of dollars heading to Ukraine this afternoon as well. $11 billion Ursula von der Leyen just sent. So, you have to electric ration. You can't turn on your heat past a certain temperature, but we're going to send $11 billion to Ukraine. And it didn't stop, actually, Vladimir Zelensky today, the president of Ukraine, actually, I guess this was yesterday. No, this was this morning, kicking off the New York Stock Exchange. Remotely, take a look at this on my screen, remotely rang the New York Stock Exchange opening bell today.
That's not a thing.
Yeah, he pressed the little dingy button from a remote Zoom call, and he basically was pushing them again for additional money. Like Wall Street, like we need some money. We're over here in Ukraine, so now reaching out to the Wall Street elite to get as much money as they can.
I'm very curious. So he's getting military aid, and this financial aid is over top of that, correct? And it is actual financial aid. It is not like that's what we're sending them in military items. That is actual cash money that we're sending them, correct?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
That's,
Direct
for
deposit.
what?
right. Great question. I mean, again, and what's interesting to me is they'll get all of this additional money for free from the United States and Europe and other places. But then on top of that, they'll take out these IMF loans, the International Monetary Fund loans. So then they're going further into catastrophic debt.
Right.
For what purpose? Like, what is the end game for them? Right. And he today doubled down and said the end game for us is we are not negotiating with anybody. We are going to get our land back, and that's it. We're not negotiating peace. We're sticking to our guns.
I mean, that's easy for him to say, right? But when you think about the lives that it costs to do this, right? It's a really sad thing to hear when you know how many people will be dragged into horrid war and a bloody war as a result.
Yeah. So,
And I was going to say, I wanted to correct you. They're not sticking to their guns. They're sticking to ours.
that's right.
Yeah.
They are sticking to our
Western
guns.
guns.
Yeah. Can you put that up to your face?
Okay.
Okay. So we do have a daily newsletter. It is redacted.inc is the place to go, sign up. And on that newsletter page, when you go to redacted.inc, you're going to be able to join up on our community as well. And just for the price of a cup of coffee once a month, you can support what we do here. We have a locals community that is vibrant. We have a great community over there. Very important because, big tech censorship, and this is a place for us to come together. We have, we can share content over there. You'll get members only exclusives and all of that. So come on over to redacted.inc. That is the place to go, my friends.
Interesting times, right? This idea of that a hot shower is no longer just a symbol of Western living. It's mind-blowing to me. I did actually the other day try and take a cold shower because we have a drought here in Portugal, and I was like, that was not fun. So, doing my part. But
yeah,
have you done any of those?
No, I will not do that.
All right.
Is your microphone? I feel like it's really quiet today. Or is her microphone okay?
Do you guys hear me? Check 2.
Yeah.
Check.
Yeah,
check
David
3.
David just pumped up the volume a bit. So
Okay.
we're good.
Okay.
It's so weird. Why does it reset itself? Like we don't touch it, in between shows. But anyway, I don't know. All right, let's get to our top story now, which is Vladimir Putin and his big speech at the Eastern Economic Forum. The highlights were coming fast and furiously today from this forum. Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke there and accusing the West of a number of different things. We're going to kind of go through this speech and pull apart. I think one of the big headlines, though, was around grain. And you want to talk about this specifically around the lies around the grain. We heard all these stories about you better open up the Black Sea. You better get all those grain shipments out of Ukraine because people are dying.
Right. And the West was saying this is the reason all of your grocery bills were so high. This is the reason your gas bills were so high. But now it will get a little bit better because we're allowed to open up the seaports through Ukraine, right? He's saying, yes, that actually happened. Those ports were opened because sanctions were lifted, but the West did not send that to the normal channels of where it would normally be distributed. He's saying most Western nations kept it all for themselves, and that this will turn into a never-before-seen humanitarian catastrophe. Let's listen to what he has to say.
Excluding Turkey as the mediator country, almost all the grain exported from Ukraine is flowing not into the poorest countries, but into the European Union. Under the World Food Programme, under the aegis of the UN, that is meant for the needs of the poorest countries. Only 2 ships have been sent, just 2 out of 87. It was used to export 60,000 tons of food out of 2 million. But that amounts to just 3% that has gone into the developing countries. In the previous countries, previous centuries, many European countries used to be colonial powers, and they continue to act as such. They are simply deceiving the developing countries. And I can say that if this approach continues, then the problem with the food is only going to exacerbate to our greatest regret, which can turn into a never-before-seen humanitarian catastrophe.
All right, so he's saying that only 3% of the grain that was shipped out, which normally does make it to the neediest places, only 3% actually went on hunger relief missions. That is 2 out of 87 ships. And he's saying the West continues its narrative, saying that that's our fault. It's really not. Once it leaves those ports, right? This is what does the West normally do with it? Well, now they're hoarders.
So they're keeping it for themselves. And then, of course, we saw who gets hurt the most, right? Like African countries get destroyed as a result of it because they're not getting any of it. So EU just hoards it for themselves. Go ahead.
Right.
Dave.
Well, and remember, too, they were blaming the mines that were in the, that area, but that turned out to be Ukrainian mines, not Russian mines. So they were blaming them then. That was
In the Black Sea? Yeah.
proven not true.
Yeah, that was, and those were Ukrainian mines that had been there for a long time that they mined. And so they were having to go through with their own minesweepers and clear all those mines out. And of course, the Western media was like, Russia is blocking the ports with these mines. It's like, no. We have journalists who are right there telling you that the opposite is happening. Why is CNN parroting this bullshit? It didn't happen.
Now, we pointed out in the beginning of the show that the reason we're covering this conference is because it's arguably just as important as the G20 conference, but you really don't get to see any of this if you search around any Western media. It's a big Eastern economic forum,
right?
Just as big as the G20 is for the West, although so anyway, we don't get to see much of this, even though there are big decisions being made here for many Asian and Eastern countries. And in fact, as a result of this meeting now, or because of it, now there's confirmation that President Putin will meet next week with President Xi Jinping. So these battle lines continue to deepen, right?
Yeah.
Now, Putin pointed out, that didn't roll off the tongue, that the slumping dollar, the slumping euro, and the slumping British pound are evidence that these currencies from these world powers are now untrustworthy, and says that Russia will now move away from the use of these unreliable, compromised currencies.
Yeah, so here's what he said specifically. He said, Western countries have undermined the foundations of the global economic system. There's a loss of confidence in the dollar, the euro, and the pound sterling as currencies in which to conduct transactions, hold assets, and reserves. Now, step by step, we are moving away from the use of these unreliable, compromised currencies. And by the way, he says, even United States allies are gradually reducing their savings and payments in dollars, according to statistics, he says. I will note that yesterday, he says, Gazprom and its Chinese partners agreed to pay for gas in rubles and yuan in a 50-50 split.
Okay, so this is a big piece of the Cold War, right? As the United States fights to continue to be the world's global currency, it will lose this battle if these countries can work nicely and control most of the world's economics and just sidestep the dollar. Well, he's not wrong when it comes to the valuation of these Western currencies. We're talking specifically about the dollar. So let's look at the dollar. Over the past year, this is a chart, I graphed it this morning, of ruble to dollar. Okay, the ruble plunged when the conflict began, sanctions hit, it did not plunge further. It has continued to dig itself further and further up.
No, we had, it's interesting. We have a good friend who travels the world. He's well-read. He's, very smart guy. But the Western media narrative he saw, we were having lunch and he said, I heard the ruble tanked. I said, yeah, it did at first for like the first few weeks, like a week.
Yeah.
Like a week and a half.
That's barely even 1 month that you see that dip.
But that was all of the media coverage, right? And then there was very little coverage of the fact that the ruble rebounded to where it was and then accelerated to its highest level against the dollar and the euro ever.
Well, let's take a look at it against the euro. Ruble to euro right now, same exact trajectory, right? These were all graphed this morning. Next chart, ruble to pound. Same thing is happening, right? So the ruble is gaining on Western currencies, which is exactly what Putin predicted when these sanctions were imposed. He said, we're going to be all right. You're not. You're hurting yourself. That's exactly what is happening. Now, the dollar and the euro are almost on par. They're about 5 cents apart. And we see now exactly what's happening to these currencies as they continue to lose value.
Go ahead, David.
Well, I was just going to say, this is like propaganda 101. This is the equivalent of like when they do a blog post, they get the information out, and then they come in like a couple weeks later and they edit it because they got more information. And that's like the media went in, they said that it tanked. And so that's where people's mind stops, because they're not going to go in and edit that live. They might have done it on a blog post, but who goes back and reads it?
Right. He further said in this speech, this has not really cost us very much. Now, I don't speak Russian, so I can't parse out the rest of the content. So, obviously it's cost lives. It's cost some people their livelihood if they can no longer do business between borders. Those are real costs, right? But in terms of like the overall economics of it, he's right.
Yeah, there was a couple of big points that we touched on some of them here, the dollar as a comparison to the ruble, but he says, I think the biggest point that he said was that Western dominance is dwindling. And I think you're absolutely seeing that reflected around the world. You're seeing allies who the United States, you're seeing it in Latin America, you're seeing it in Europe, you're seeing it some European powers. They're moving away from the West because they see the writing on the wall. They're saying, wait a minute, where has this gotten us so far?
Yes.
Where has this gotten us so far? And he says, again, he called it the sanctions fever. He says the West caught sanctions fever as it sought to impose its will on other nations.
Right.
And he said the world is facing serious economic challenges. Unlike the impact of COVID-19, the current turmoil is made because of Western nations' decisions.
Yes.
We've been saying that for months on the show.
The dollar is only like the petrodollar. The only reason it's valuable is because it's what oil is traded in. But the problem is the oil is what's the commodity. That's the valuable thing, and that can be traded in anything. So
yes.
The minute they start trading that in rubles and the yuan or something like that, they work together. Our dollar is gonna collapse. So why would they want anything to do with the dollar?
Well, and also all the minerals, right, and other commodities. So it's not even just oil, which they're sitting on massive amounts of, right? It's copper, it's uranium, it's lithium, it's all of the things that China and Russia jointly, along with the other BRICS nations, can come together and form this new world order. And saying we're backing our currency by things that actually have tangible value, right? The United States currency is backed by air. It is backed by debt. Remember, the United States was taken off the gold standard in the early 1970s. Therefore, the US dollar is not backed by gold anymore. It is backed by debt. It is a debt-based currency and US military might. We played Jeffrey Sachs' quote on the show last night where he says that is how the Western authorities, that's how Western governments exert their power, is through military might, right? And so if you are a debt-based economy with military, that's basically like your version of gold.
Right. And so, of course, people will hear us speaking about this and saying, this is pro-Putin propaganda, or this is pro-Russian, this is pro-nothing. We're trying to listen to what he's saying, observe what's happening in the real world, right? So that we can react accordingly. So if we ignore what he's saying, while his economy is the only one doing well, right? Then we're just going to keep wondering, why are we hurting? We can't figure out what's actually going on. We cannot believe what our leaders are saying, right?
No, absolutely not, because our leaders are spending time talking about MAGA extremists, right? Instead of talking about, I was thinking about like President Biden today. Like, imagine if he had gotten up there, we talked about like the soul of a nation. Like, he could have given a really powerful speech, said, I'm going to throw everything out the window. I'm going to get up here. Americans are hurting right now. We're going back to the drawing board and we're going to fix this country. Like, Americans would have said, okay, you just admitted some mistakes. All right, let's see what you got here.
Yeah.
And instead it was, I'm going to attack the people who disagree with me and I've got nothing for you. I've got nothing to give you. And at the end of the day, Putin's right. He also, one big thing that he said.
Oh, no, he has something to give. He fights with outrage and propaganda, right? Which is what the United States is really good at, right?
Right, absolutely.
And so, hey, we now have a common enemy, which is MAGA. Does that make you feel better?
So-
This is now we're all on the same page. We're fighting ideology.
Well, this was their
Great.
strategy. This all, by
Go
the way,
buy some cheese.
this all came out of a think tank. You guys, when you were watching like President Biden last week do his MAGA speech in front of the V for Vendetta Red Wall, like that came out of a Democratic liberal think tank in Washington. And so too did the idea of attacking Putin and calling it Putin's price hike, which was a total disaster, right? No one believed it. Everyone thought it was garbage. That literally was workshopped and thought of in focus groups and think tanks in Washington. So then they rolled it out. So here's how we're going to go attack our enemies, our political enemies. And instead of focusing on Putin anymore, we're going to focus on MAGA as we head into the midterm elections. And that'll work. Well, we saw the first poll out today. Tim Pool had it this morning. Like the first poll out of that speech, Americans, liberals even hated the speech. So, wow, you really screwed up. Anyway, another big piece that came out of this Putin speech that I wanted to talk about was his Asian nations section, where he talked about Asian nations. He said most of the nations in the Asia Pacific, the APAC region, reject the destructive logic of sanctions. And he said, and they want to do business with people that will actually benefit the growth of their people.
Of their own population.
And so you're seeing this alliance play out. Next week, again, Putin is meeting with Xi Jinping. The Belt and Road Initiative that's expanded across Asia and through parts of Russia and into the Middle East, out of China, has increased growth through that region tremendously. And he says the abundance of countries like this in the APEC, the Asia Pacific region, is great competitive advantage and a source of long-term development. So again, where the United States wants to send warships into the Taiwan Strait to show strength, right? And like Okinawa is like, hey, why do you still have military bases here? Can you get the hell out of our country? You promised us, Bill Clinton, that you were going to leave many, many years ago. Why are you still here? Instead, maybe this is the way to go about it instead of military might. I don't know, just a suggestion.
Well, some of the other participating countries were Uzbekistan, Armenia, India, Mongolia, Myanmar, most of the Asian countries, as well as most of the Eastern ones as well. And so, these people aren't messing around. They are going there trying to figure out how to actually build their economies while the West is messing around.
Yeah.
Right. With words, with even like today. So I spent some time going through the Eastern Economic Forum website because I wanted to read the agenda.
Their platform. Yeah.
Right. Oh, no, I just wanted to read what the sessions were. Right. And then because I'm a Western person and I'm in a European country, a pop-up popped up and it's like, how can I help you? Do you want to talk about? And I was like, ooh, am I allowed to, I shouldn't chat with you.
Because you can't see.
Because I'm afraid.
Well, because the EU still blocks certain websites. I mean, isn't it amazing? Like the EU blocks like RT and other. And still, I mean, it's amazing to me that they're blocking like these websites in a time. I mean, it's ridiculous. So one of the other big things that Putin talked about was the colonization piece of this. And really, this is where he really dug his teeth into the West and talked about the colonization of the Western nations, and basically says that they deceive these countries all the time by telling them they're going to be there to develop them. They're there to basically rob them, deceive them. I mean, we're watching it happen firsthand in Syria, right? We're there to protect your oil, and except we're stealing it from you. So anyway, we'll listen to this soundbite from Putin talking about colonization and Western countries, and tell me what you think of it in the chat room. Watch.
Многие европейские страны в прежние десятилетия и столетия действовали как колонизаторы, так и продолжают действовать сегодня. В очередной раз просто обманули развивающиеся страны и продолжают обманывать. Очевидно, что при таком подходе масштаб проблем с продовольствием в мире будет только нарастать, к сожалению, к огромному нашему сожалению, что способно привести к небывалой гуманитарной катастрофе.
So we deceive them, and and I think that's absolutely the case. Show me in a situation where we haven't deceived the countries that we've set up military bases in.
Silence.
Well, and also look at all the countries like collectively. Once they realize and they see a couple countries like, oh, we don't have to fall in line with the U.S. sanctions anymore. Because if you don't do what we say, we throw sanctions on you, and that's only because our dollar is traded in oil. That's the only reason we can do that.
Yeah. Yesterday there was news circling around the Western media about the fact that Russia may be buying arms from Iran, right? And so
North Korea.
North Korea. I'm sorry. Thank you. That didn't feel right. It came out of my mouth. And so I was trying to figure out, like, okay, this is the United States intelligence saying this to us. What are they inviting us to believe, right? That this is a bad thing, or, that these are two bad guys working together? Or are they trying to say that one sanctioned nation is doing business with another sanctioned nation? Is that proof that sanctions work? I can't wrap my head around that.
They don't work. Right?
Because if they're both saying that it works, I think they want us to believe, like, see, we draw a line in the sand around these two countries.
The West thinks that this is proof that sanctions work.
Yes, that's what I think. I'm sorry, I didn't explain that well.
Because the Russia is buying arms from North Korea. Like, that's proof that sanctions work. I guess because we're not buying them from Northrop Grumman, or they're not buying them from some U.S. defense contract.
Right. I mean, we don't even know if it's true, right? And it came from a war sort of think tank report, right? One that we've known to be skeptical of before. But at the same time, it's like, I'm just wondering why so many media outlets picked it up. What are they asking us to believe? They're trying to sort of prop up our belief that Russia does business with bad guys because they're bad guys. Right.
Well, and the Western media, of course, is such a joke because they're just relying on so these intelligence agencies come out from Washington and others and Western intelligence sources tell us that Russia's buying their arms from North Korea. Really? Is there any journalistic proof of that? Or are you just literally regurgitating talking points from the Pentagon?
No, they just wrote it out.
Yeah, they're like stenographers. So as I mentioned, Ursula von der Leyen, I mentioned Zelensky. We showed the little clip at the pre-show. Zelensky going to the New York Stock Exchange via remote call-in so he can continue to get money, and rang the New York Stock Exchange bell. They all applauded. He was there at the New York Stock Exchange to raise some money. And then he got some extra money. He didn't even have to go very far because the EU, which is, of course, under enormous pressure, they're going to continue sanctions to their own detriment against Russia, but that's not stopping them. Ursula von der Leyen tweeting this morning, they're sending an additional $10 billion, and the EU already provided. This is on top of the $10 billion the EU already provided an additional $5 billion in macro financial assistance for the country. So there you go. The EU suffering. European countries can't keep the lights on, but we're just going to send billions in aid to Ukraine.
Okay.
And I wonder if they're selling those T-shirts.
Right. Yeah. What did this T-shirt say? There's no price of freedom, right? What does it say? Let's look again. The power of freedom.
The power of freedom. Okay. I don't know what that means.
Should reverse it and say the freedom of power.
Yeah.
The power of freedom.
Salty Ball in our chat says, you have to understand Ukraine invasion was all about Taiwan. Russia goading EU into conflict, North Korea, etc. I've said all along that, of course, the main focus, is China and Taiwan. And when I said this the other day, China invading Taiwan, someone corrected me and said, China can't invade their own country. Taiwan is China, so Taiwan can't be invaded by China. Okay, fair point. But when China, mainland China, decides to visit its island of Taiwan, it's not going to be pretty. And that's the main focus. That's what all of this is about. All right, we've got more news to get to here on the show. We're going to talk about the IAEA report. We're going to talk about Israel attacking Syria. We've got a special guest to talk about that in just a few moments. Vanessa Beeley, excellent journalist Vanessa Beeley. She's going to be joining us from Syria to talk about that story. And we're going to talk about Serbia and NATO. But first, let's talk about this International Atomic Energy Agency report, the nuclear report, which just came out today. Now, you remember last week, you had the IAEA director, Rafael Grossi, showing up with a number of inspectors. They were making their way from Kiev all the way over to Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. It has been under attack by Ukrainian shells for the past few weeks. And Russia has held the power plant since early March. There is no disputing among anybody who actually pays attention to the actual data and the journalists on the ground where the shells are coming from. It is coming from the Ukrainian side.
Well, a Ukrainian general admitted that last week, right? But the IAEA said, we're here now, mommy's here, like we're going to get it taken care of. We're going to tell you how this is happening, why. They promised us they were going to stay until it's over, right?
Right.
That was we all waited for the director to finish his vacation interrupt his vacation, get there quicker, right? Because we are now all concerned about a nuclear event. So they released their report today. Their conclusion is basically, yeah, that's dangerous and it should stop.
So here is the report. Yeah, I mean, it's a whole lot of gobbledygook, bureaucratic gobbledygook and just garbage. So they were there for a number of days watching as the shelling continued. Here's the report: the Nuclear Safety, Security, and Safeguards in Ukraine, the second summary report by the Director General. And, it has all we got a nice photo shot here.
How can they date it April 28th through September 5th when they only just told us they got there on September 1st?
Because this is when the last report concluded. So their first summary report wrapped up in April of 2022. Okay. So now this is like the gap between April and here, but they just got here on September 1st. So what are you relying on for that other amount of data? I'm just curious. Like
downloads.
It's like
from a thumb drive.
I wish I would have done that in high school. Like, here's all of the hours I've worked on this classroom. Here you go. Clayton, it says you've been working on this since January. It's now June. Did you work that whole time on it? Yes, I did. I don't ask questions. I worked on it the whole time. So they only worked on it for a few days. They were there. They left 2 inspectors there. The main inspector, Grossi, left. But this report is kind of a joke. So the Reuters has a good summation of it here, a little bit here. They said, overall, the IAEA is gravely concerned about the situation at the plant because the shelling continues. Says this hasn't changed at all. The IAEA is still gravely concerned about the situation, and it hasn't changed. Despite challenging circumstances, the IAEA has continued to implement safeguards in Ukraine. And the biggest, I think, takeaway from two big takeaways. One is that they want a demilitarized zone, a zone set up around Zaporizhzhia. So they want to have like a stable condition zone where, they don't want any military around it. They want a security protection zone. And we are ready to start immediate consultations leading to the establishment of such a nuclear safety zone to protect the Zaporizhzhia plant. The other thing, of course, is the damage to the plant. The team closely witnessed shelling in the vicinity of the plant, in particular on September 3rd when the team was instructed to evacuate the ground level administrative building. So that's their report.
You didn't bother to see where it was coming from if you were there?
So that's that's to me the big takeaway. Well, one is the zone they want to
because, I learned in high school physics that things have a trajectory.
Right.
I just thought.
You thought that they would look into that?
Yeah.
No. So that's the biggest piece of this they just didn't cover. They didn't look into it. They're like, it's outside of our scope. It's outside of our scope. How the hell is that outside? That's the whole reason you went there.
Now, Russia is saying that this call for a demilitarized zone is not a serious solution because this is not a militarized zone in the first place. It is guarded, the power plant is guarded by Russian forces, but there has not been conflict there. And it is run by Ukrainian citizens. So the shelling is coming from outside of the zone. So even if they set up a periphery, right, then they can still send, whoever is doing it can still send projectiles
over
in.
Right.
They should not be doing that. They should not have been doing that. So what makes you think that if you just go and draw some chalk around it, whoever's doing that from the outside in is going to stop it?
And of course, as journalist, I think Roger Eliason, I forget his first name off the top of my head. Forgive me. Excellent journalist, and Eliason. Anyway, we featured his sound here a few weeks ago on the show. He said the biggest concern from one of these power plants and having the shelling is not so much the radiation, which would of course be awful, but it's the water. It's the contaminated water, which would be vaporized and would literally kill thousands immediately, and then hundreds of thousands after that. So that's the real concern. Shelling the plant has to stop, and it's continuing right now. Right now, Ukraine is continuing to shell this nuclear power plant. It's like they're, I don't know.
And are you talking about George, just to be clear?
George. Yes, George. Thank you. Not Robert. So Russia responded. Yes, Russia responded and said that it's regrettable that the International Atomic Energy Agency failed to identify the culprit for the shelling. And while its proposal to demilitarize the facility is not serious, Russia's permanent representative said on Tuesday. They personally, he said, and then this is, so I want to play this sound here because I think this is important. So Grossi went on with Christian Amanpour to talk about his results of this whole thing. So I want to play some chunks of this because it's so frustrating. Okay, play it.
And let me just ask you out and out, is it safe? Do we risk a threat of any meltdown or radiation leak or such thing right now?
Thank you very much. Good to be with you again. The situation is very worrying, continues to be very worrying. I was there, as you said, last week. I returned, and the shelling continues. So we are still facing a very grave danger. In your question, there were a number of things you mentioned in terms of a meltdown. I doubt it, but the mere fact that there is a continuity of attacks and shelling, deliberate or not, wittingly or unwittingly, people are hitting a nuclear power plant, the largest in Europe.
So who is hitting the power plant and why are they continuing? Wasn't that your whole job, Raphael? I mean, I know you want to get back to Vienna, and have some great chocolate or whatever, but for crying out loud, you were there for like 2 days, arguably one of the biggest stories in the world right now. Who is shelling the nuclear power plant?
I mean, in his defense, who wants to stick around a power plant that's being bombed?
Yeah, but that's your whole job. Like
right.
You're the IAEA director. Like, what else do you have? What other situation in the world demands your attention right now besides the Ukrainian nuclear power plant that's under siege?
So I must say that the danger continues.
So when you say people are hitting, can you make a determination as to who is hitting?
I cannot make that determination. We don't have the means to do that. As you know, you would need to be looking or monitoring the military operation in the region in all its vastness.
So look at even just looking at that video right there in Entrodar, right, Ukraine. It is under massive shelling at this hour. It has been, over the past 24 hours, Ukraine has been pounding the town of Endahar, which is right there at Zaporizhzhia. It's not hard to figure out the azimuths of where these trajectories of these missiles are coming from.
And Russia was ready to show them the shells that were marked from Britain. They saved them. They photographed them. They were ready to show that, right? They didn't seem interested.
Or the HIMARS weapons that were used to attack, which, as Scott Ritter on our show talked about, is a war crime that the United States, they're using American HIMARS to attack a nuclear power plant.
And so what is the opportunity cost that is missed here by an official not saying this is Ukraine, the West should stop enabling this because people will die, right? So in order to save bureaucracy, to save face, to continue to be supported, I don't know, to be popular in the Western nations that this guy presumably lives in, he won't say this. Stop sending these bombs because they're being reckless with it. And everyone around here will suffer. There are children, there are animals, right? Let's have some compassion for things that are not just crazy adults.
Right. So at the end of the day, this report is a joke. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think the most telling part of it is that he won't say who it is. That tells you exactly who it is, because if it was Russia, everybody would be screaming it was Russia.
Oh, he'd be happy to say it. You're right. Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Yeah, in the absence of it. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And of course, they're under enormous pressure from the EU and America, right? You're going to go there. You're going to be independent. So no EU representatives, no American representatives are going. And by the way, no Russian representatives are going. And we also found out, actually, that undercover during when they arrived, they were undercover members of the Ukrainian military and intelligence service who were dressed up and pretending to be press. And that was later revealed. So they were literally there dressed up as press agents from the Ukrainian side while they were meeting with them and the inspectors initially. So again, at the end of the day, this is a total shit show. It's a total joke. What did we learn? You want to have a neutral zone around the nuclear power plant?
No, we learned that it's dangerous and that it should stop.
And it's grave. He said it's a grave situation. It's a grave situation.
Yeah, I'm so glad we waited for that.
Well, and you guys aren't chalk experts to know what kind of chalk they might have used. It might be missile blocking chalk. We don't know at this point.
Okay.
Right.
Or like a dome.
Well, also that
Yeah.
I know I'm not an inspector, but one way to find out is pick up one of the bombs and see if it has writing all over it, like love messages to people's wives, because you know who does that.
Right. That also was an option.
Here's the thing: if it was manufactured by Northrop Grumman or Raytheon, there's a good chance, or if it's manufactured by British manufacturers, it's a good chance that it's coming from the Ukrainian side. Just a thought.
Yeah.
We've got more news to get to here on the show. We're going to be joined by a special guest, Vanessa Beeley, in just moments to talk about the attack on Syria by Israel, a story that no one in the Western media is covering at all. Vanessa has been doing an excellent job actually covering the story, and we wanted to have her on to amplify that story so that the rest of the world gets to hear about it. And we're also going to talk about Serbia readying for war against NATO aggression. They've been there, done that. Why are they buying weapons right now in order to protect themselves? So all of that and more as we continue on the show. You want to tell us about our friends over at Indeed?
Sure, I will. Now, you know your business is your dream and you want to hire the people who share your dream and have the skills to help it grow. You can find them faster with Indeed. Now, I know during the pandemic, it was a buyer's market, right? But it is about to be turned into an employer's market. So you want to be ready to find people who need that job and who can work with you and your company. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. So instead of spending hours on multiple job sites searching for candidates whose resume on Indeed will help you find the resumes actually that match your needs. You can use Instant Match with over 80% of employers getting quality candidates whose resumes match their job description the moment they sponsor a job. And according to Indeed, US data, right? So employers don't have to just sort of sift through a black hole of candidates that do not match their qualification. Indeed helps star applicants shine with over 135 assessment tools from cooking to coding. And Indeed assessment helps take the stress out of the interview process because your candidates get to prove themselves before the interview so that you and them can both dive deeper into talking about what's important to you instead of just sort of going down bullet points in your interview, right? Even better, Indeed is the only job site where you only pay for applications that meet your must-have requirements. So join the 3 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. So start hiring right now. You will get a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/redacted. That's an offer that's good for a limited time only. So claim your $75 credit right now at Indeed.com/redacted. Once more, that's Indeed.com/redacted. Terms and conditions apply. If you need to hire, you need Indeed.
Well, Israel has once again attacked Syria. This time, Israeli military attacked the airport in Aleppo, Syria, destroying the runway. This is a civilian airport, and all flights, as I understand it today, are now being routed through Damascus. So the question this afternoon that we wanted to ask is, why is Israel bombing Syria? And joining us now from Syria is excellent journalist and friend of the show, Vanessa Beeley. Vanessa, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Clayton. Thanks for having me back on, especially to talk about this.
Yeah, very important story that's not getting any coverage in the Western media, and I'll ask you about that in a second. Why are we not seeing any coverage in the Western media? But first of all, can you just tell me what happened? What happened at the airport in Aleppo?
Well, basically 1 week ago, Israel at 8 p.m. in the evening, for the first time, attacked Aleppo International Airport. But the majority of the missiles were brought down by the Syrian air defense systems. And there was minimal damage, material damage. And in fact, the airport was up and running again, I think 2 days later. And so last night, and on the same day, of course, Israel also tried to attack Damascus International Airport. So the two main civilian airliners or airports in Syria were attacked by Israel within 1 hour. And last night, Israel again attacked from the Mediterranean, so from the coastal waters. I think it was 6 missiles incoming. The air defense brought down 5, but unfortunately, 1 missile, at least, as far as I know, hit the runway, causing fairly extensive damage to the runway itself, fairly big crater. And as you rightly say, now the flights are being redirected to Damascus, whereas before, of course, when they targeted Damascus airport, everything was redirected to Aleppo. That was about a month or so ago.
So this is a civilian airport, correct?
Predominantly. There have been, I mean, Russia actually used to keep some of its warplanes there, but I don't think they are there anymore. Russia does have a skeleton military staff there. And in fact, last week they were given a 10-minute warning to evacuate before Israel fired on the airport last night. I'm not getting any confirmation that there was a 10-minute warning, and if there were any Russian military personnel there or not. That, again, is a change in tactics from Israel, because they've been very hands-off as regards Russian deployment in Syria, and they've been very careful, of course, not to target Russian military or Russian bases.
So they're attacking these civilian spots inside of Syria,
Yeah.
attacking Syria, giving Russia a heads up, 10-minute window heads up to move, get out of there, get your military out of this position because we are about to attack. Where is the Western coverage of this? Where is the Western media covering this story?
There's absolutely none, because, of course, Israel is acting in lockstep with the West. It always has been, as regards, it's partaking in the dirty war against Syria since 2011. And of course, it's always worked in lockstep also with the terrorist organizations. And that is why it's happening now, by the way. If you want me to go into an explanation as to why Israel, the various reasons why Israel is doing this now.
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, because I wanted to ask you, why are they doing this? I mean, what is their motivation for attacking inside of Syria?
There's probably 4 main reasons. First of all, of course, Syria is under some of the most savage sanctions, economic sanctions, and illegal economic sanctions imposed upon them by predominantly the US, EU, and UK. But Turkey also is included in that. So Israel, for some time now, has been targeting the ports, for example, in Latakia, the airports. This is civilian infrastructure, by the way, effectively. So this is a war crime, although they're not actually, in theory, at war with Syria. So it's a war against you. It's a crime against humanity, in reality, right? And so their agenda in this aspect is to destroy Syria economically, to shut down every single possible way out for Syria, or every single trade entrance and exit for Syria. That's number one. Number two, of course, what they're trying to do, because Iran and Russia have supplied air defenses, sophisticated air defenses, to Syria. Russia, the S-300, and Iran, since 2019, the Bavar 373, which is equivalent to between S-300 and S-400. So it's a little bit more sophisticated than the S-300. Syria has 4 Russian S-300s on Syrian territory. So what Israel is trying to do, in my opinion, is trying to probe to see where these air defenses are based in order to take them out. Because what it's been doing systematically during its attacks, of course, is attacking military-based runways, also early warning radar systems, air defense capabilities. It hit the Messiaf Research Center 2 weeks ago. There are a lot of the sort of defense weaponry is designed by Syria inside Syria. So it's clear what it's trying to do. It's trying to prepare for what it perceives, what it calls this is the war between wars. So what it's saying is these are operations between wars. So it's talking about a future escalation against Syria. And what it's trying to do is to probe to see where the Iranian and the Russian air defenses are, to be able to destroy them in the case of escalation in the future. So it's effectively trying to completely incapacitate Syria as regards its defense against a bigger Israeli attack.
So
in
a
the
future, like future proofing it. They're just using Syria. We're gonna launch attacks on Syria, Syrian people, Syrian civilians, and Syrian targets in the hopes of identifying future positions of Russian and Iranian military equipment and potential attacks.
Yeah,
in the
or
future.
to basically what it's hoping to do, because the S-300s and the Bavar 373 have not been deployed yet. They've not been used in anger, right? So what they're trying to do is to provoke Syria into using them. And this is where it's a little bit incorrect for people to start saying, why isn't Russia using their S-300s? Russia isn't using its S-300s because Russian S-300s are only deployed around Russian military bases or military posts, right?
Right.
They're not there for Syrian use. Syria has 4 Russian S-300s ready to use, right? But it's holding back. Why is it holding back? Because it fires them, it opens itself up to being targeted and potentially damaged or destroyed. And that goes also for the Iranian Bavar 373, which started arriving from 2019 onwards. So Syria knows at some point there is an escalation coming. So it's not prepared to show its hand, its defense hand to Israel, in order that it has the element of surprise if Israel should escalate this to a low intensity or high intensity war. But one of the other and very important reasons that Israel is carrying out these attacks now, one is Russia and Syria are closing in on the northeast, right? And there have been attacks on the US occupied oil fields there. The US is also maneuvering troops around. It's not necessarily expanding its troop presence, but it's moving around and it's reinforcing and it's deploying ISIS to various areas of the eastern desert. So we know there is an operation coming in the northeast, which will release Syria's resources, predominantly wheat and oil. We also know that since the Tehran summit in July this year, Erdogan has been backed into a corner. Now, Erdogan was told if he invaded Syria, he would not only face Syria, he would face Russia and Iran. He was told that very clearly. So he's backed off on the military invasion of northern Syria. And it's now at a point where he needs President Assad and he needs Syria more than Syria needs him. He's coming up to elections next year, right, in June 2023. He needs President Assad to help him resolve the refugee problem, to resolve the problem of the terrorist groups in the northwest. So in a sense, Syria is on the brink of reclaiming northwest and northeast. Okay, it's a little way off, but it's looking a lot more positive than it was 6 months ago. So this is also annoying Israel because it doesn't want Syria to be stable and independent again, right? So it's attacking the airports in a sort of rage against the positivity. You know, we're seeing really Syria coming into ascendancy now. As Russia is coming into ascendancy in Ukraine, Syria is also coming into ascendancy, and the foreign ministry is starting to feel stronger again. It's opening up trade routes with South Africa, with China, with India, with Donbass even, right? So it's coming into its own again. And Israel desperately doesn't want this because a powerful Syria is a complete anathema to Israel. And the fourth thing that they're doing is starting to spread these rumors. For example, there were Israeli intelligence satellite images allegedly proving that Russia was withdrawing one S-300 from the Mesyaf area to the northwest of Damascus. and taking it to Ukraine because Russia was running out of ammunition.
Right.
Okay, that's number one idiocy, right?
Right.
And then trying to sell the idea that Russia is abandoning Syria. This is very important because they're using this to kind of try to stir the people up against the government again. Okay, because the people are feeling, quite rightly, they're feeling, why aren't we doing anything? You know, why aren't we responding? Why isn't Russia responding? Why do we keep having to get hit by Israeli attacks? Well, the fact is that the air defense, which is predominantly Pantsir S-1, so relatively kind of old-fashioned, you know, almost Soviet Union era air defense, is doing a very good job. You know, multiple times Israel has targeted the center of Damascus, and those missiles have not hit because the air defense is reacting very effectively. But what Israel and the West are trying to do now is to whip up anger against the government and to precipitate a Syrian response to Israel before they're ready. Because for Syria to respond to Israel in the way that I believe they will, they need to have their resources, they need to have their wheat, they need to have their economy strong. And I believe that's, you know, relatively short-term goals for Syria now. So again, Israel knows they're preparing to respond to Israel, but in their own time. And Israel doesn't like this. It likes to be the kind of the provocateur, you know. It likes to be the one in charge. So it's also getting frustrated that Syria is not falling into the trap that Israel is setting for it.
Absolutely.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's complicated and fascinating at the same time. And no wonder the Western media just doesn't cover it because it's so nuanced and you need to spend time really diving into. I mean, you think about the Western powers that are involved in this, think about the Middle Eastern powers that are involved in this. And then, of course, the United States just announced they're building a third military base. Of course, Bashar al-Assad says the United States military has 28 posts, bases in Syria. The U.S. only really, I guess, recognizes 2 of them, but are now building a third near the Syrian oil fields. Your take on that?
They're not actually building a third. What they're doing is kind of switching forces around and reinforcing what was an existing outpost. As I said, they're maneuvering probably because of the Syrian-Russian exercises. Let's not forget, about 2 months ago, Russia and Syria led a live fire military exercise on the banks of the Euphrates. So they're sending a very clear message to the states that, you know, your time is limited. You know, we are going to take back this territory. That they've been targeting the oil fields. It's more guerrilla forces actually that have been targeting the oil fields, sort of local activists. And that was always planned as well, that they would use local tribesmen to carry out isolated attacks against US positions in the Northeast to kind of weaken their resolve. And Americans don't have very strong resolve when they come under direct attack, to be quite honest. You know, they love to be very like Israelis. They love to be, you know, in power in the air, bombing and destroying and obliterating everything. But when it comes to kind of hand-to-hand combat, when they're facing an enemy that is ideologically attached to their territory, to their land, to their homeland, and to their people, they kind of, that resolve disappears, to be quite honest, from history.
Well, because what does the United States even have to do in Syria, right? There's it's not like it's, you know, it's not like they're defending New York City, you know, right? It's, you know, and to ask any American, like, why the hell are we even in Syria in setting up illegal military bases in Syria? Most Americans have no idea. They maybe hear some propaganda because, well, they're fighting ISIS. We did a whole video yesterday on this and how it's total garbage, right? But what do you wish in all of your reporting that the people in America, the people in Europe, the people in the rest of the world would understand about what's happening in Syria?
Actually, I really wish they would just stand in solidarity with Syria. You know, they've leapt on the Ukraine bandwagon and everyone's put their Ukrainian flag avatars everywhere. But Syria has been under attack by one of the largest war coalitions, I think, in history for 11 years. And it's now under the jackboot of economic sanctions. It's surrounded on all sides by hostile states occupying their territory. And, I don't ever remember there being a mass stand by Syria movement as there is with Ukraine. And with Ukraine, guys, you're on the wrong side anyway. Sorry to say this. And in Syria, that's all they need, is to know that you stand in solidarity with them and that you will protest the sanctions above all else, because it's the sanctions that are preventing reconstruction, the rebuilding of hospitals, the ability to provide medical and humanitarian care to their own population, etc. And that's all that they need, is just for people to recognize what has been going on in Syria for 11 years and to actually start saying, no, I stand with Syria. I put a Syrian flag on my avatar because the US is invading illegally, as it has done throughout its history.
Right. Yeah, and no end in sight, of course, and ramping up more presence in Syria. Vanessa Beeley has been my guest. Where is the best place for people can find your great reporting? Is your Telegram channel, but also your writings? Where's the best place people can go?
Probably the best one now is Substack.
Oh, Substack.
That's
Okay.
probably where that's where I'm putting just Vanessa Beeley Substack. Yeah.
I'll make sure we have a link to that in the description so people
Thank
can
you.
read your dispatches and writings. Vanessa, joining us from Syria. Thank you so much, as always, for your great reporting and your time.
Thank you, Clayton. Thanks for having me on and for covering all the things you do. There's very few people doing what you do, so I really appreciate it.
Thank you. We got a lot more news to get to here on the show on this Wednesday edition of Redacted. Again, our thanks to Vanessa Beeley. Follow her. We'll have a link in the show description for her Substack so you can read her reporting there. Very, very important. We're going to talk about Serbia and NATO in just a moment. Another very important story that is not getting much coverage in the Western media at all. So all of that, and then we'll take your super chats in a moment. But first, I want to tell you about our friends over at Moomoo. If you'd like to get up to 13 free stocks valued up to $32,000, you can by opening a free trading account right now with Moomoo using the link on your screen by going to redacted.inc/Moomoo. Now, Moomoo is a NASDAQ company with a market value of $6 billion and a global user base of 18 million people. Now, I use Moomoo every day for my stocks. When I'm looking at my portfolio and seeing what kind of commodity stocks I'm going to look at today, in the energy sector, if I'm looking at uranium, if I'm looking at copper, all of that I'm trading right on inside of Moomoo. But the best part is when you sign up and open your account right now through the end of September, they've extended that offer for you to get 13 free stocks, 13 of them. 13 valued up to $32,000. Now, you just have to make your initial deposit in your account. I started my account with like $100, and then you'll get triggered to get those 13 free stocks. I think you get a few of them when you open the account, and then they give you an additional like 10 after you make your initial deposit. Again, you're not spending money, you're just putting it in the account, and then you can watch those stocks grow. And as they grow in value, you can sell them, and then just keep that cash in your account or move it to your own bank account, whatever you want to do with it. It's totally up to you. If you also want to learn, right, they've got great learning platform in there as well, an education platform that you can learn about how to trade, all of the different types of stocks and ETFs and other things that are out there in the market for you to study. And you can paper trade too. So if you don't want to use your own money, you can do what's called paper trading, which is sort of like a university. You can kind of trade along, and you could, like I always joke about, you could follow Nancy Pelosi's husband's stock picks because he sure seems to have some good ones. You could follow along with his stock picks just using paper trading, right? Not even actually trading with your own money. And then when you feel confident enough, maybe 5, 6, 7 months from now, you can do that. I have a friend who started paper trading. He was a young guy, started paper trading for the first year. He was just studying, learning. And then after 1 year, he made his first trade, and now he's a multimillionaire. Like he was just out of college, and he was going to figure out how to do this. So he spent 1 year not using any of his real money, just paper trading inside the app. and then now he's a multimillionaire from trading. So again, and he started with very little money, by the way. So again, try it right now. Get some free money. Open your account by going to redacted.inc/mumu. Again, redacted.inc, not .com. It's .inc/mumu to get your 13 free stocks.
Well, the leaders of France and Germany have sent a letter to Serbian President Vučić telling him to work out that little spat that they have going on with Kosovo there.
Little spat, yeah.
This, which is nice of them to say, but the border conflict that we've been covering here on the show was actually worked out last week. So why are NATO leaders bossing Serbia around, and why right now? This is a question we've decided to take on.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because even through the escalation in the war in Ukraine, of course, we were hearing, we had Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany, flying in to try to bully Serbia into forcing sanctions on Russia, and they said, no thanks, we're not going to do that. We're not going to be bullied by Germany. We're not going to be bullied by the EU.
Yes, exactly. So, over the past year, Kosovo and Serbia, let's just sort of briefly go over what the border conflict was. They've been arguing over passage between the borders of the two places. Now, Kosovo declared independence in 2008, but that is not recognized by Serbia. It is also not recognized by China and Russia and several European countries. The United States does recognize Kosovo as its own place.
Because they forced them into it. Yeah.
Right. And they sort of like these.
So here we're going to create this little place called Kosovo, and you're gonna like it.
So they still consider Kosovo a part of Serbia, and so do many people living in Kosovo, right? So does this sound familiar? If this were an SAT question, yes. I put this together like this. If this were an SAT question, how would you answer this? Taiwan is to China. Here's a little quiz. As Kosovo is to.
All right. See, Taiwan is to China, as Kosovo is to Serbia.
You're right.
Or, and like you could even
or you could do
Russia. Yeah. Russia is to Crimea, right?
As Kosovo, or you could say, depending on your perspective, right? Or Ukraine is to Crimea, right? Or, okay, so we understand what we're dealing with here, right? These are border disputes that people feel very strongly about inside and outside of these borders. So you see where we're going with this. Now, we're currently in a global energy crisis in the West because outside influences go into territorial disputes and tell those nations that they know better, right?
Right.
So and that's not working out so far. So we're going to take on another one with Serbia.
So what Serbia, when we were in Serbia a little while ago, we saw construction. We saw people that were happy with their president of Serbia. We did a report out of Serbia, and I've heard from a number of Serbians that said, thank you for I can't believe like an English-speaking team, a news team actually covered what's going on in our country fairly. We showed the support from Russia and to Russia. We showed the construction and building that had been going on. We also showed the side of Serbia that shows they remember the 78 days of bombing by NATO.
Yes.
Right? They remember these things. And they have support of their president, who stood up and said, we're going to sign a gas bill, a gas package with Vladimir Putin to make sure that we have gas for the winter. And how prescient was that? Right? Just think about this. Was, I think, in May or June, he signed this gas deal with Putin.
Yeah.
Right? Vučić did. And now look what's happening to Europe. I mean, people are scavenging in Germany. Olaf Scholz flew to Serbia to tell Vučić, hey, you need to go and put sanctions on Russia because we need to really clamp down on Russia. We need for Ukraine. And Vučić said, no, I want to take care of my own people. And now people in Germany are out there in their own woods trying to find firewood,
right?
Because they don't have gas. And now Putin just shut off the gas line to them. So how smart was that?
Well, Serbia, I was going to get to this later, but we'll talk about it now, is suffering inflation,
right? Just
like other surrounding regions, because it is, as dependent on all the regions around foreign imports.
Yeah.
So Serbia, their president's motto is to take care of their own economic needs first, and we see how this is a precarious time to make those decisions. So back to the territorial dispute, it was the case that Serbia required Kosovo residents to have Serbian ID and license plates when they crossed into Serbia. And likewise, Kosovo was about to do the same, require Kosovo ID and license plates when Serbian people crossed over into their borders, disputed borders. And that did not go over well. It prompted protests and military exercises. It was kind of a throat clearing, right?
Yeah.
And so these planes were going across the border.
I think those were NATO planes, right? There were NATO exercises.
There were indeed. And there were also Serbian exercises as well. So as the deadline for this documentation loomed, both sides backed down, actually. And Serbia agreed to abolish entry and exit documents for Kosovo ID holders. And Kosovo had agreed not to start, right? So this is pretty much a done deal since both sides decided to just kind of choose no conflict. But still tensions are high. The Serbian army is still holding military exercises near the Kosovo border. So President Vučić got this kind of nosy letter from German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and French President Emmanuel Macron. They say that they want President Vučić to show maximum determination and willingness to make difficult decisions that will promote the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia under the auspices of the EU. Now, what's interesting about this is that they are addressing Vučić as the leader. There was not, as far as
Kosovo.
we know, yes,
Yeah,
right. So
right.
there was no duplicate letter sent to any Kosovo leader, as far as we know, right?
Right.
This phrase here, under the auspices of the EU, feels kind of like a dangling promise. You know that Serbia has applied for EU statehood, but that's been backburnered for a long time based on
Do they want it anymore? I mean, this is the thing.
Well, that's the thing, right? Because Serbia has refused to condemn Russia, and it's sort of been happily extending existing gas deals to Russia and has continued to sort of side with Russia. Now they're saying, don't you remember you wanted our support? We're the EU. You wanted in. Come over here and let us tell you what to do. It's almost like a reminder, like, remember you wanted in the EU.
But then you could also look at Hungary and say, but I see what Hungary's doing. They're remaining neutral. They're taking care of their own people. They're saying, hey, we're not just going to let Finland and Sweden walk willy-nilly into NATO.
Yeah.
We're going to sign gas deals with Russia. We're going to shore up and take care of our own people. So, hey, why is it okay for Hungary to do that?
Right.
But we can't do that?
Because Hungary is already in, right?
I
And
guess,
so
it's like, hey, I already got past the gatekeeper.
yeah.
Now let's party.
And so it's interesting, right? Now that Serbia, I mean, who knows really what the sentiment is, but having been there recently, we know that most of the sentiment is not hankering to become westernized, right? It is not like, oh, we wish we were part of that, you know. And so what is the pull now to join the lot of the rest of the European leaders who are saying, like the woman, the German leader that we played last week,
foreign minister,
who said, well, you know, Germans will say to me they can't pay their energy bills, and I'll say, yeah, that's fine, but we have to make our promise, right, to Ukraine first, right? So why would Serbia join in the line of these leaders who are making such odious decisions?
I don't know. I mean, of course, I just can't imagine if you had to lay this out, and you have to wonder, look, we're seeing economic growth, significant economic growth in Serbia. Yes, everyone's now dealing with inflation, of course, because of all of this craziness, because of these Western leaders. No country is an island. You know, you're still operating within a global economy. So even Iceland, which is an island, still has to deal with the inflationary pressures of the globe, right? So why would they, at this stage, if they could align themselves with Russia or a BRICS economy, right? Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, China. If they could align themselves with the BRICS country currencies, and you have a guy like Vladimir Putin today in that speech at the European conference saying, hey, Western currencies are collapsing. We are shoring up our own currencies. And if you're Vučić and you're saying, okay, Russia's been there for us, they've signed gas deals for us, like, what is our future?
Yeah.
And of course, it's only 1999 that they remember being destroyed by NATO in 78 days of bombings. Should we just go through some of the... Should I pull up a little history here? Yugoslavia, it was Yugoslavia, now Serbia, 1999. They when NATO struck, they hit a major media center, right? Major television outlets and everything destroyed. A hospital destroyed, and then another hospital in Belgrade. NATO destroyed tons of bridges, including one which was bombed as a civilian train was driving across it. The bombing also destroyed the electrical grid, released toxic chemicals as a result. It hit columns of refugees. And then NATO wouldn't release any information on the bombing. They later finally admitted to killing a number of civilians. NATO did. They're like, it's collateral damage. It's fine. They finally did admit to this. So, I mean, they remember what it was like to be attacked by NATO. They were destroyed, essentially. Why would they want to join up with them? Why would you want to be a part of that group?
Right.
It's like wanting to be friends with bullies.
Question.
Wanting to be friends with bullies after they bully you. I don't get it,
Right. It's interesting. And, how do we know how President Vučić will take this? But we saw that he did not seem intimidated by German Chancellor Scholz when he said, look, you should join us in this sanction things. And he said, you deal with your stuff. I'm going to deal with mine. He seemed like, he's not going to be intimidated.
But this is why, to me, global politics and geopolitics, it's so fascinating, right? Because, they want us to, the globalists want sort of like a unipolar order, right?
Sure.
This idea where sovereign borders don't matter and people in certain regions don't matter and everything is just homogeneous. And we're seeing now in this past year to 2 years how important it is for countries to have their own sovereign decision-making bodies for their own people in their own regions with their own food and their own minerals and their own resources. And this idea of like a Star Trek Next Generation, like unipolar, there's one world. And by the way, in Star Trek, like wasn't like Starfleet, like San Francisco was the center of the universe in Star Trek? I don't know.
Yes, it was.
So I love how it was a Western, United States, of course, but. Anyway, I find it utterly fascinating and good for the Serbian people that you've got a president. Hopefully, let us know if you disagree. But I think that a president is like looking out for the people of Serbia. No one's perfect, but it's certainly a breath of fresh air from what we see in the West.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And hey, maybe you'll find out that if you bully people through bombs, that maybe those people aren't going to align themselves with you. At the end.
Oh, I think the chat room did not hear what you had to say.
Your mic,
David, you were muted. I was wondering why your camera didn't. So it looked to the people who were watching that like we were listening like this to complete silence.
Well, that's what I heard. I didn't hear David. I just saw you guys just stop talking and just wanted to stare. You were thinking.
I was wondering. I was like, pull up David so that I don't have to be responding like this.
So what David said was he was always reminded of the Monsters, Inc. line. They've been trying for screams for so long, right, to fill up the screamometer or whatever it is in the Monsters, Inc. And then they finally realized that laughter was a better solution to make the kids laugh instead of scare the crap out of them. And so trying for peace instead of trying for war. What a novel idea. Novel idea.
Well, that does it for us today. We will see you here tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us. Do you have something else you'd like to say?
Oh, I just want to see if we're going to do super chats.
Did we have super chats on the agenda? Do you have any, David? Would you like to?
Yeah, we have a few. There's not many, so I'll just storm right through them.
Who's texting you like crazy during our show?
It's not me. Look, hands in the air.
You guys, that would be the redacted chat.
Oh, okay.
That would be me. I'm texting him because the reason I'm not putting him on screen is because his camera is like
his
really
internet's
pixelated.
bad.
Yeah, it's strange. Do you have the super chats, Philip? Would you like to read them?
Well, no, David, you can hear him, right?
Yeah,
we can hear you. Okay, yeah. Can everybody else hear him?
Before we get to super chats, let me just tell you to subscribe to our channel. I didn't do that yet. Please, please, please subscribe to our channel. Yeah, there you go. Just youtube.com/redacted news. We're here live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time, trying to cover the stories you won't see in the mainstream media. And we have a daily newsletter, which is totally free. If you come over to redacted.inc, that's the place to go. And I'll show you what this looks like here on the screen in a second as it loads very slowly. Here we go. If you come to redacted.inc, just click on the sign up for our free newsletter. So it's not .com, it's redacted.inc, Redacted Incorporated. And click on the free newsletter, and you can support what we do here and read the newsletter every morning.
All right, super chats.
All right. Super chats. Here we go. I'm just going to breeze right through them.
Okay.
We got hidden with a super sticker. Sherry Stott, there is a rumor that both Sean Penn and Ben Stiller were blocked from going into Russia. Jan Norbo with a super sticker. Natalie Chavez, I trust in your words. I believe that you guys are genuine and speak truth. Thank you for being honest and honorable.
Oh, thank you.
Salty Bell, you have to understand Ukraine invasion was all about Taiwan. Russia's goading you into conflict. North Korea starts stuff leaving China to invade because we can fight two-front war. Make sense? Alexander Lidson, have you seen the petition of 20,000 citizens handed over to the IAEA?
Oh.
Yes, about, Ukraine shelling.
Chief 270202, do you think the war is just part of the WEF agenda? Oh,
absolutely it is. I mean, it was provoked and started by NATO. I mean, this is all part of it, right? I mean, this is in order to try to yes, absolutely.
Outlanders, we need a peaceful revolution. Agreed. We need laughter. That's what we need. Yeah. Truth Blast Broadcasting, love the show. Please set YouTube to default play your other redacted videos when it is over, or else mainstream media auto plays, especially on non-live videos. I don't think we have control over what YouTube plays after our videos, to be honest.
No, you can't. Honestly, if you want to just watch some of our videos, come to our channel. Just go to Redacted on YouTube, youtube.com/redacted news, and click on a playlist and play that, because unfortunately YouTube will just try to force feed mainstream media news to you.
Yeah, that's so interesting, right?
Yeah.
Like, after watching this dangerous stuff, we're gonna give you some wholesome, good truth news.
They're gonna
forget
give you
what you just heard. Believe this.
Here's a Rachel Maddow video for you.
Denise Abatron, they are dangling carrots. Do you want what we have? Do what we say.
Yeah, right.
And that's Al Britton, sorry. And Jay Junglis, thank you for all you do. And that's all the super chats.
Thank you for all you do, everyone, for being here as part of our community. We really, really appreciate it. Again, we're back here tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern time. Please check out all of the other videos that we have here on the channel, so you don't watch mainstream media content. Just go over on our channel and click another video right now. That'll help them. That'll stick it to them. That'll stick it to them. And we'll see you back here tomorrow, everyone. Have a great night.
Bye-bye.